Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me for the first episode of Meditation and Art. In this podcast series, I'll be discussing how artists and particularly artists with a consistent meditation practice blend those two together, how the meditation process affects the creative process and so forth, like that. Some of the benefits of meditation with art and things like that. So we'll be diving pretty deep into both the artist world and the meditation world and how they meet in the middle. So today I have with me as my first guest of this series, very exciting, the great actress, writer, producer, Naomi McDougall Jones. Now, I met Naomi on a cruise ship a couple of years ago, where she was doing some really evocative speaking on women's rights in Hollywood. And I was really drawn to the work that she was doing as an activist, as a writer, as a producer, as an actress. So a little bit about Naomi's background here. She, as I mentioned, a writer, actress, a producer of two 13-time award-winning feature films. The first being titled Imagine I'm Beautiful, which came out in 2014, and Bite Me, which came out in 2019. I love the contrast between those two.
They're both commands, but very different commands.
Yes, indeed. Bite Me was released via a 3-month, 51 screening, 40-city joyful vampire tour, which I'm sure we're going to talk about quite a bit here. I imagine I know a bit about that already. That tour was across the country of America and into Canada, right, if I'm not mistaken.
We didn't make it across the border. There were work visa questions.
Yeah, that old immigration thing. Hey, Naomi is an activist, as I mentioned, a speaker, an author for bringing gender parity to cinema. Her TED Talk, What Is It Like to Be a Woman in Hollywood, has received over 1 million views. Do go check that out. It's quite evocative, as I mentioned. Her book, The Wrong Kind of Woman, Inside Our Revolution to Dismantle the Gods of Hollywood. It's now available wherever books are sold. For more about Naomi, you can visit her website, www.naomimcdougalljones.com. Welcome. Quite an introduction.
I'm so honored to be the first guest.
I appreciate it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the beginnings of your career, how you actually got started. I believe you first started as an actress, right? Mm-hmm. Then you moved into writing and producing and so forth. Yeah. So tell us about that evolution.
Yeah. Well, I've wanted to be a storyteller ever since I can remember. And I think in the way that happens with a lot of little girls, when they discover that they're storytellers, everybody tells you that you should be an actress because that's sort of the thing that everyone feels like women are allowed to do in the storytelling realm. So that became and I do love acting. And so that became my goal. And I mean, my whole childhood, I was just hell-bent on getting to New York and being an actress. And so I went to acting school and then got out for college and then got out and started auditioning and very quickly came to understand that the roles available for women are terrible in film in particular. And just spent 2 years auditioning for Naked Corpse #4 and competing with 300 other incredibly talented, beautiful women to play the very supportive girlfriend. And the roles were so degrading, boring, just not reflective of the women that I knew in the world. It was like this, and to this day, only 1/3 of the roles on screen at all are women. So film is, which just as a reminder, women are actually 51% of the actual population. So it just, I came to understand that film was this really bizarre medium in which women are a minority population and never get to do any of the interesting stuff, basically, and mostly have to be naked. So I just got so frustrated that I was like, well, like I can write better roles for women than this, so I guess I should do that. And with a friend, we decided to make our first feature film, Imagine I'm Beautiful. And I mean, we knew less than nothing. We just literally started cold calling indie film producers. We made a spreadsheet. We started Googling indie film producers in New York City and made a spreadsheet of everyone we could find, and just started cold calling and emailing them and asking them how to make a movie. Or if we could take them to coffee and if they'd tell us how to make a movie. And enough of them said yes that we sort of figured it out. Yeah, and then I got bitten hard by the filmmaking bug, and also during that time developed a thriving side gig as an activist for women in film, which I think arose partly because I sort of came to that around 2011, 2012, when I became a filmmaker and started experiencing the incredible sexism and overt sexism towards female filmmakers, which I thought was bad as an actress, but is so much worse as a female filmmaker when you're trying to actually gain a position of power and gain a voice. And I just couldn't believe the things that were being said to us just in meetings like they were normal. But like it was a reasonable thing to say, like, well, girls, you know that you're going to have to get a male producer on board at some point just so that people will trust you with their money. And I just became so enraged that this was still going on. And at that time that almost nobody was really talking about it. I mean, I felt like I discovered we were living in the Matrix, and I just like had to go around like making sure that people knew we lived in the Matrix. And so that's really what led to this big speaking career on that subject, and to the TED Talk, and then eventually to the book. Because it's just so damaging that this medium that shapes everything from our hobbies to our career choices to literally our neural pathways is, to this day, 95% of studio films are directed by men, and overwhelmingly white men. Which is skewing. I mean, it's like all of society is trapped in this monolith of the white male gaze.
Right. Yeah. Well said. I mean, it's particularly in the West, Hollywood has is such a powerful lens. The amount of money that's spent into making feature films, and the amount of widespread distribution is so. It's such an unconscious influence on the mind.
Absolutely. Well, and particularly now within the last 10 years, I mean, Hollywood used to primarily distribute their films domestically. I mean, of course they would sell them internationally, but over the last 10 years, foreign sales have skyrocketed of their movies due to some sort of shifting macroeconomic factors. And so now not only are they poisoning our US viewpoint, but they're exporting that white male monolithic matrix gaze on the entire planet.
Yeah. I know, as in my travels too, I fall susceptible to stereotypes not infrequently. And I know that there are stereotypes that have been, handed to these other cultures that I'm traveling through by Hollywood. And it's a very, it's very a strange thing to have that projected out onto you, Yeah. So good. It's good that you're doing that work. And it sounds like to me that this arose as kind of a need, like you were serving this need, kind of almost like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but almost like a calling, because you felt this void that you experienced firsthand. And then you were like, well, how can I serve this? What can I do here to remedy the situation?
Yeah, no, it certainly has felt like that. And Yeah, I think it's become a big part of my life for that reason. Like, I certainly never set out with a goal of being an activist as like part of my life. And certainly it, if the, I would be only too happy to set that down again if the situation were rectified. Um, Although I find great purpose in that work, I would be very delighted to never have to give another parody and film speech ever again. But I suspect that probably within my lifetime that work will have to continue. I don't think we'll get to parody before my career is over.
Yeah, I know what you mean. In Buddhist circles, that's known as the Bodhichitta, or the opening of the heart mind. And in Bodhichitta practice, one visualizes the universe filled with all of these suffering beings. And the visualization goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're just witnessing all of the suffering over and over again. And then at the same time, reaffirming the prayer of, I vow to alleviate all of the suffering, I vow to alleviate all of the suffering. So you're going back and forth between those two experiences, and then at the very end of the meditation, you realize you won't save one single being. And it drops you, like your heart just and that's what that sounds like to me, is a version, your 21st century version of the Bodhichitta meditation practice, where we are, I mean, to like from my point of view, I do these loving kindness practices and teach loving kindness retreats in a similar way, as kind of it's my contribution to bring this shift in awareness. Now, without over romanticizing my work, and this isn't about me, and I know, like, after every retreat, I have the same thought, like, I'm going to do this, maybe one person, maybe two people, and that's why we keep doing it, over and over again, because we see the suffering in the world, and we know that it doesn't have to be that way. Or we see the things that are out of balance in the world, and we know that it doesn't have to be that way because we've seen it ourselves. And to see the type of suffering that's causing, you just get this calling, like, how can I serve that? That's very beautiful. So it's good. It's welcome to the front line. Yeah, it's good. So tell me, I mentioned a little bit about Buddhism there, and a particular meditation practice. I know you have a thriving, healthy meditation practice yourself. So talk to me a little bit about how that might have influenced your writing, perhaps influenced your acting, and so forth. How does that play a part?
Well, so when I met you on a cruise ship 2.5 years ago, I did not have a meditation practice, and that was a very interesting moment in my life that I met you, because I remember saying, I think, to my husband, Stephen, who was on the trip with me, I was very, very sad on that trip. It was this amazing trip that we got to go on for free, because I was giving talks. I was giving rousing feminist speeches to confused cruise goers on the ship. We're like, we're on vacation. Why are you speaking to us about feminism? But it was we got this amazing trip out of it. But it was this moment where I had, over a number of years, I had continued to achieve more and more sort of success markers in my career, and I think, and had the experience that I think a lot of people do of getting these success markers that you've been chasing and finding them really empty, and sort of like feeling like there was a hole that they would fill that they didn't, and I was very sad. And I think a lot of people who experience success, that becomes a very isolating thing, because if you're experiencing all the success, your peers do not want to hear about how sad you are. That's like, that's not a conversation they want to have. And so I was just in this moment of really being sort of on my knees, and not really knowing the path forward. And then I met you, and we had a number of conversations on that trip, and in your lovely, gentle, non-pushy way, meditation kept coming up, and I began thinking more and more about it. And I think one dinner you were like, well, if you ever want a teacher, and it sort of felt like, yeah, okay, maybe that's a lifeline here. And so I started studying with you when we got back, once a week for 2.5 years now, which is pretty stunning. And I mean, it's completely changed my life, and I'm not saying that just because I'm on a talk with you. I would say that in any podcast, but it's true. It's hard to talk about how it's impacted the work as much as it's just impacted everything, in the sense that it's grounded me within myself in a way that I didn't have before, which I think has allowed me to come to an experience of my work and my art in a much more honest way. And to begin chasing the joy of doing that was actually the reason that I wanted to pursue this career in the first place, right? I mean, that's the childhood thing of telling stories and putting on plays with the neighborhood kids and being in community theater, and that kind of just pure joy in the doing of the thing was the reason that I set out on this career. And I feel like meditation has allowed me to understand in a very deep way how that is the thing I need to be chasing in my work, rather than anything external.
Yeah, that's quite a revelation.
Yep.
Yeah. So would you say that in that newfound freedom that allows a certain, so you have this newfound connection with this creative process, I guess, or this joy that you mentioned. So I would imagine that kind of, when you're not chasing the successes that our culture tells us we should be chasing, we kind of reconnect, as you said, with that childhood joy. I imagine that it allows a different type of creativity. I don't want to put words into your mouth.
Yeah, for sure. And I think to Hollywood in particular is famous for sort of getting people to perpetually chase baubles and like sort of get very disconnected from themselves and their true path. And like, I often say that Hollywood operates much like a high school lunch table. Like everyone's trying to get at the popular kids table, but like it's very unclear how that happens or like what you need to do to be cool enough to be. It's horrendous. And so like it's so easy to fall into that pattern of like, well, I need to work with this person because they're friends with the popular, and I just have over the last several years been able to release really all of that. And so not only in my own creative process do I feel more connected to the work, but maybe more importantly I just have gotten to build projects with the people that I just genuinely want to work with. And if it doesn't feel good to work with somebody, then I don't work with them. Like, it doesn't matter. I don't care if they're at the popular table. Like, it's just because I have looked into that abyss and seen how empty that is.
Mm. Yeah, it's something I can very much relate to with my previous life as a musician.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot of that too, and yeah, it was a very similar experience actually. The closer I got to where I thought I wanted to be, the more I realized that wasn't where I wanted to be. And yeah, uh, um, yeah. So now I'm teaching meditation, which I love. I have no regrets about that. But I understand, what you're speaking to resonates with me very deeply. Great. So let's talk a little bit about, first I want to talk about Bite Me, because I know you were using some meditation
Yeah.
teachings in your tour, which you sent me a YouTube video that I found really breathtaking. Brought tears to my eyes to see how you were bringing these teachings to life. So why don't you talk a little bit about that and what that was about before?
Sure. Yeah, so actually this ties very neatly into what we were just talking about. So my first feature film, Imagine I'm Beautiful, we were chosen to get a distribution deal through a traditional distributor, which is a very, very big deal. That's like one of the things you're taught to chase as a filmmaker. And the outcome, like, it felt like we were Cinderella, but then the actual outcome of that was pretty underwhelming, both from a financial perspective and from sort of just an experiential perspective of having the film released. I think films take a phenomenal amount of time to make, and the only reason you're really making it is to be able to share it with audiences and to have the experience of people seeing and responding to your work. So by the time Bite Me came out, as I had meditated my way out of a connection to what people were telling me should be true, my producing team and I decided that we wanted to self-distribute the film because the things that we wanted, that connection with the audience and also a financial return, were just way more likely if we actually just self-distributed it. Because we knew who our audience was and how to reach them. So we devised this slightly madcap Joyful Vampire Tour of America, where myself, my husband, and a documentary filmmaker moved into an RV for 3 months last summer. And we drove 13,001 miles all around the United States. And we did 51 screenings in 40 cities in 90 days. And after almost every screening, we threw a joyful vampire ball. So the film is literally is a rom-com about a real life vampire and the IRS agent who audits her. But what the film is really about is outsiders and sort of seeing through our external differences to what is true and similar about all of us. And also sort of how terrifying it is to really show up as all of who you are in the world, that takes that's a tremendous act of bravery, and to sort of like just let people judge you as they will, but just to continually show up as all of who you are. So in the spirit of that, we invited the audience to come to screenings dressed however made them feel most joyful. That was the invitation. So some people came dressed as vampires, but we had some truly amazing, like one woman came dressed as the album cover of the Yellow Submarine album, because that's the thing that makes her feel most joyful. And, some people just wore a lot of glitter, or just, it was whatever you wanted. And so then after most screenings, we threw a joyful vampire ball, which was sort of part costume party, part chance to meet and hang out with us as the filmmakers part, sort of like let your freak flag fly event. And so as a transition from the film screening and the Q&A into that event, before the tour started, we were really wrestling with like, how do you set that space for people? Because we were just going to be showing up in town and having big audiences of people who didn't know one another, didn't know us, and how do you really set that space to let people feel comfortable meeting strangers and like really meeting strangers at a time when technology has made us forget how to do that, because all of these moments that I mean, now we're in COVID, so this is even more true, but before COVID even, all those little moments where you used to interact with strangers, like waiting in the checkout line at the grocery store or on a bus or whatever, everybody's now on their phones. And so those little moments where it's possible to reach through that barrier to a stranger and interact, we've forgotten how to do that. And it's become very socially weird to do that because now everybody's on their phones. And so we were thinking about, well, what are we going to do? And I think at that time you were teaching me the loving kindness meditation in my own practice. And I just realized one day that that's it. That all anybody really wants is to be seen and accepted for who they are. And so what we did was I would lead the room in a loving kindness meditation first for themselves, because I think a very profound thing in the teaching of that meditation is that you have to start with yourself, and that it is impossible to offer that truly and freely to other people until you have actually been able to give it to yourself. So I would start with them, and then I would say, okay, now I want you to look around the theater and find one person who you don't know and have never spoken to. And now we're going to close our eyes, and now you're going to offer that same loving kindness meditation to that person. And it was an unbelievably profound experience. I mean, we did it 51 times nearly, and every time people would start crying, and it really would unlock something in the room. So then from there I would say, okay, now let's go to the Joyful Vampire Ball, and I'd invite you to keep that same loving kindness space open in that event. And when you meet somebody new, and I encourage you to try to meet somebody new, don't ask them what they do or where they're from or where they live and all the normal questions that we ask people, but instead ask them either what makes you joyful, or what is something you'd like me to know about you. Like, try to see the person, not the labels. And those events were so amazing because people really did see each other and meet each other in a totally different plane than we normally do. It was really very special.
Yeah. I imagine so. Yeah. Well, tell me about what that felt like.
I mean, it felt very expanding, and I found myself weepy very frequently too. And I think we did make a whole documentary of this tour, and there's one episode, I think it's episode 3 of the Joyful Vampire Tour of America series, which is on YouTube, where the documentary filmmaker did such a good job of capturing this part of the night and sort of like people's expressions. And I think it really made me understand in a different way how deeply we all just need to be seen and accepted in all of ourselves. And particularly traveling around to different parts of the country doing this was so interesting. There was one screening where, when I said, and now I'm going to lead you in a little Buddhist meditation, where this was a very Christian part of the country, where 2 people stood up. I said the words Buddhist meditation, and they stood up and they walked out of the theater. And I was like, okay, there we are. But that aside, there was almost nobody that failed to reach. Um, even people were like, in the beginning, I could feel that the room was like, like, you want me to put my hand on my heart and close my eyes? Like, what? Buddhist meditation, what? But just that simple act of, and one of the phrases in the meditation is, oh no, now I'm doing the compassion one, which is like it, but slightly different. But may you be seen and accepted for who you are, or something.
May I experience the world opening to me just as I am.
Yes, which is such a beautiful prayer for ourselves and each other. And I think it really made me understand the degree to which, like, that is the thing we're all seeking.
Beautiful. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, for me, I those phrases, and that one in particular, seems to hold a lot of weight in the current world situation. But I'm not sure we've ever been in a world situation where that wouldn't hold weight, and so yeah, it's one of those practices that just keeps speaking and speaking. Hopefully eventually we'll get to a place where it doesn't speak anymore, but like we were saying at the beginning,
yeah, probably not in our lifetimes.
Probably not in our lifetimes. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for using the vehicle of your tour, no pun intended, for raising awareness. And there's no greater movement. I don't know. Like when I see people working in Hollywood, or musicians, and or they're in this position, they have a stage, and for me there's a choice there. Each time somebody gets on a stage, I'm getting on a soapbox now, but they have a choice there of enlightening people. They have a microphone, they're in that power place to where they could bring something of a higher vibration, and you chose to go with a higher vibration, and I think it takes a lot of bravery, and I really applaud you for it. I think what the world needs now, right? So kudos and congratulations for that. It's really beautiful that you managed to do that. And speaking of bringing higher vibrational frequencies to mass audiences, that brings me to The Light Ahead, which seems to me to be very an extraordinary work of high ambition. So why don't you tell us about that? And also reflective of a high level of compassion as well. So let's hear a little bit about The Light Ahead.
Yeah, so this is a project that has actually emerged out of COVID, which is, I think, this is a time of great destruction and great possibility and creation. It's interesting to be in a time of both ends of that being so heightened. But I have a friend down here in Atlanta, where I moved in November, who is Jess Remington, who's a next economy activist and thinker and writer. And she is co-authoring this book right now called Beloved Economies, that's about the next economy movement, and sort of that's coming out next year. And so she and I have partnered on making a podcast that we're now in production on, called A Light Ahead, Stories for a Beloved Economy. That the goal of the show is basically to explore the question, what would 2030 look like if the USA had an economy that truly cared for everyone? And so what we've done is we've paired 23 screenwriters with 23 next economy activists and thinkers and organizations. And so in the movement that Jess is part of, there are all these people with these really amazing and innovative ideas about about what a different kind of economy would look like, exploring everything from different types of universal basic income, what that could look like, to what would it look like if if the US government did pay reparations to First Nations tribes, as well as to those who are descended from slaves, to even just some questions like there's one woman working on the question of like what would a bank look like that loved Black women? Like what would that financial institution even look like in its form? And so we've paired 23 screenwriters, and each of them has been assigned an activist. And the writers and activists are meeting right now, and then the writers take that person's idea and turn it into a fictional 10 to 15 minute narrative radio drama, essentially about a moment in 2030 if that activist ideas came true. So in the way that that show Black Mirror looks in the future and says sort of like, what happens if all of our worst instincts win out? This show is looking in the opposite direction of what if we actually got things right? Like, and that's why the show is called A Light Ahead. What is a positive thing that we can be working towards, or in this case, 23 different positive things that we could be working towards over the next 10 years.
So how does one tune into this podcast?
That's a great question. So the podcast will start getting released towards the end of August.
Okay.
So your best bet is actually to sign up for my newsletter on my website, which is NaomiMcDougallJones.com, and I'll definitely be sending out notices. We're in talks with a couple of different distributors, so I'm not actually sure what platform it's going to be on.
Yeah, sounds amazing. Yeah, again, what a movement towards compassion, and the more drops in the bucket, and that sounds like a big rain shower. To me. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. We talk a lot about Star Trek with this, because there's this phenomenon that Star Trek, when it was on television, the writers of that show came up with all of these technologies as like super futuristic technologies. Like, wouldn't this be great if these technologies existed? And they put them in the show, as a result of which many of the children who were watching the show growing up then went on to go and invent those technologies that they had only been able to imagine because they were in the show. And so our goal with this podcast is to do a very similar thing for sort of social change and economic shift. Like, how do we know what we're working towards if we don't have a light ahead, if we can't see where we're going?
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, and sharing your light ahead. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'll just say a few closing words here. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This will be available on probably on Instagram, on my Facebook page. It'll be available on my podcast audio as well, which is Such Sweet Thunder. If you go to Spotify and put in Such Sweet Thunder and my name, my podcast comes up there. So that'll all be made available to you there. If you are an artist and you have a meditation practice, please do get in touch with me if you'd like to be featured on the show. I'm actively looking for people. I have a couple, the next month or so lined up, so that's exciting for me as well. But if you'd like to be featured sometime over the summer talking about meditation and art, please do get in touch. Thanks again, and I will be back on Monday doing my Such Sweet Thunder meditation program on Facebook Live and on Instagram, where I'll be giving a talk on mindfulness of the breath and body. So I hope to see you all there. Thanks again, Naomi. Be well, be well. Yeah, thank you.